while government has yet to finalise what form a state-owned bank would ultimately take, Treasury says that a lot of the technical work for the new bank has now been completed. And briefing Parliament's Standing Committee on Finance recently, National Treasury Director-General Dondo Mogajane reiterated government's commitment to the establishment of a state bank, which will be expected to provide financial assistance to South Africans who are most in need. Now, one scenario would see the merging of some of the country's development finance institutions, such as Ithala Bank, into a single entity. Ithala Bank CEO Dr. Thulani Vilakazi says that they are already set up to operate as a state bank. As it currently stands, it's the only state-owned entity that provides full banking services, making the concept of a state bank a natural progression for the institution. Now, Dr. Vilakazi joins us now to discuss this further. Dr. Vilakazi, good morning, and thanks for giving us your time here on Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to our viewers. Thank you.
So you say Ithala Bank is ready and this would be a natural step, but perhaps we can start off by just taking a look at the services currently being provided by Ithala.
Yes, we certainly have been operating for quite some time. So if you look into the aspects of banking, we normally call it the 4 quadrants of banking, which is where people can save, they can invest, they can borrow, they can insure. Now, Ithala is offering these services fully fledged as we speak. We are part of the parent that has been in establishment for 60 years. And Ithala currently is operating under a dispensation of what is called a notice of exemption. And the other difference with the rest of the other quasi-financial institutions is that we are also a deposit-taking institution that we are mobilizing deposits from the public, and then we offer these 4 perspectives. But there is a uniqueness which I can share with you in terms of why we are saying we are actually ready, tried and tested as we speak at the moment.
So please share that with us because you say you are ready, but last year the Prudential Authority said that they were giving Ithala Bank until June 2021 to actually submit an application for a banking license in terms of the Banking Act. So explain to us where you are in terms of that.
Yes, currently we are actually positioning ourselves and addressing a number of obviously gaps. Maybe let me start with the fact that when it comes to a state bank institution, currently just from a legislation point of view, we currently operate under a hybrid of legislation. So we are part and parcel of the PFMA and National Treasury regulations. At the same time, we have to respond through to the Prudential Authority on the Banks Act, which places quite a burden in terms of ourselves as a state institution, but at the same time, any future conceived state bank institution. There are various sections of the PFMA, particularly Section 66 and Section 67, which, for instance, precludes certain things that in a normal market that a financial institution could do. So currently, we have addressed the governance elements at the board level in terms of getting the proper blended knowledge of board members, as well as setting up some of the subcommittees. Our executive team has been in place. I have joined here since September last year to make sure that we are able then to fulfill most of the requirements. There are still some gaps, obviously, with regard to certain financial legislation, particularly the Financial Matters Amendment Act, which was enacted in 2018, which has created a bit of a difficulty because it's calling for a national state-owned entity to lead a state bank. Whereas this institution, which is a regional bank in KwaZulu-Natal, has demonstrated uniquely over the last couple of decades that we do understand what really entails a state bank. A state bank, Sakina, if I may proceed to that, would need to be more of a demand-led type of an institution rather than a supply-led institution. A supply-led institution currently, those mostly are our commercial banks, because what they do, they actually provide products for people to fit into those products. In other words, they make the availability of technology and other things and so on for people to fit in. Whereas on our side, we are more demand approach led. In other words, we look at the society as to what are some of these challenges that they face, and then we do that. Some people might argue and say, look, at least 71% of the population now has access to bank accounts. But if you look deeper into the aspects of who's actually have access to banking, you realize that out of that 71% of the population, the usage percentage is about 16%, which means that people are purely opening bank accounts and they transact maybe once or twice and then they lie dormant. Here's the uniqueness of Thala of what we have done. For an example, we are the only quasi-financial institution that is able to lend home loans in rural areas. And you would know with the challenge of the land tenure and the security and using the land as collateral. So we have perfected products that actually respond to people's societal problems. With the fact that a large majority of middle class, currently you will notice this in South Africa across rural areas, they currently almost returning to the land of their forefathers. And you will see, particularly in the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and other provinces, you have these sprawling new cities that are rising in our rural areas. Ithala is right in there and helping those people to finance those homes and also to insure some of those properties. So that then gives the uniqueness of such an institution that it has to have a developmental approach.
And what about other services that you would be able to render? And also, I'd like to know, in terms of discussions with Treasury at this point, what are some of the hindrances that they are still dealing with in trying to establish a state bank?
Yes, some of our products that we have, for instance, we do have insurance. In terms of our providing insurance, particularly both in rural and urban settings, livestock insurance, short-term and long-term insurance that we do there. We also have a very unique educational program because a development state bank institution would also need to take an approach of educating consumers as well as people that it is dealing with. Last year, when COVID hit this country, we were able to provide some level of COVID relief to our clients. But at the same time, we are very strong on the literacy program, particularly financial literacy, where we have taken close to 200,000 young people through literacy programs so that when they enter entrepreneurships and programs of entrepreneurship, they are informed and they know very well as to what are the obligations of managing a particular instrument or a particular product that they've acquired from the bank. Regarding the challenges that are in place, I think the challenge that the South African authorities have to take into account is that there is an issue around the aspect of regulation. For instance, if you look into the freeing of space, in other words, creating the enablement that is required, the government would need to look seriously at some of the sections of the PFMA. The Act obviously has good intentions, but there are intended sections for institutions such as ourselves. For instance, on Section 7, there is an aspect as to how you manage your cash and how you report and so on. And then there are other sections, for instance, that would also preclude an institution to be able to borrow and go into the market. For instance, when you now operate as a fully fledged bank, you need a forex dealership license, which is obviously covered under Section 67 and Section 66 of the PFMA. Currently, as the regulation stands, it actually makes it very challenging for any institution to emerge because now it has to fulfill those obligations. Yet, an institution such as ourselves that operates in KwaZulu-Natal, where we have what we call a tourism dollar, which is quite critical to kickstart our economy in South Africa, would need to be able to operate under the guise of a forex dealer, a forex licenseship. Then on the bank side, on the Banks Act, currently, obviously, one has to fulfill certain obligations. We have to make sure that the depositors, the public interest in terms of deposits, is actually protected. At this stage, Ithala has some level of guarantees in certain aspects. But obviously, as a bank, you can't just depend on tier one type of equity, which is called pure equity. In other words, raising the money from the public to actually fund your business. You also need a very strong tier two capital. And that tier two capital would actually imply, for an example, that you would be able to go and make and actually launch a medium-term note instrument where you are able to raise finance. You would also be able to go and raise finance with other multilateral institutions. Currently, this is quite impossible for most of the institutions, including those that have been earmarked. So I think it's at the right time that the government must now consider deregulation as a form of a catalyst kickstart the establishment of the state bank.
So how you manage your finances and the trust factor are also key, Dr. Vilakazi. I'm sure you'd agree. So according to the Auditor General's report, about 2 years ago, Ithala Bank entered into an agreement with an Indian multinational company, technology company, Tech Mahindra, for a digitized system for the bank, a digitized banking system. And the Auditor General reported that you had paid 34 million of that contract and you had absolutely nothing to show for it. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so when we came on board, we actually came across that report. So what we have done, we work very closely with the Prudential Authority to work with the firm that they have appointed to actually investigate that, because it's quite critical for us as professionals and bankers that when we come in, we are able also to clean the house. So currently, the report has been issued. Our board has actually taken a very strong decision around where do we go from here, particularly in terms of assessing and also making sure that we have to recover if then previously there was a service that was not rendered by a particular service provider. So that's quite critical. And that stems from the aspect of governance that is quite critical, because people like ourselves are coming from the commercial environment in banking for over 20, 25 years. And we are very sharp when it comes to things around how then do you manage projects, how do you set up steering committees and so on. So Ithala has been been in that space where you need this expertise that must be brought in from the commercial world. I must assure the public as well as the viewers that when it comes, for instance, the assurance, we have a fully fledged assurance team. But obviously, there's one vacancy at this stage in terms of risk officers, compliance officers, anti-money laundering officers, and most of these experts and professionals that are now here at Ithala come from well-established institutions and listed Johannesburg Stock Exchange institutions.
That's
so
all
we
good
are on
and
top
well,
of that.
Dr. Vilakazi.
We'll be reporting shortly.
All good and well. What I was asking is whether you have anything to show for the 34 million rand that you paid to Tech Mahindra. It's a few months later now. Have you got anything to show?
At this stage, we are sort of confirming with the forensic post because Reserve Bank did their their investigation first, and then they've tabled the report to us. Now they've asked us to actually dig deeper in terms of the forensic, because when you talk about software and something that was developed and deployed, you really need the experts to tell you, is it there or not there? But we know that at this stage we have not, in terms of our elementary assessment, as well as Section 7 report, that we have not had anything to deploy. So those funds that were paid have to be either recovered or also come to some level of actually making sure that if something had to be deployed, it had to be deployed. If it was not deployed, and therefore we have to recover those funds. We are very clear on that. And if there's an element of criminality that has taken place, we are also going to take very drastic steps to recover the money, because that money belongs to the public.
Is Tech Mahindra still providing services to Ithala Bank?
No, we froze the relationship. It was frozen prior to my tenure here around March, April last year, because the Section 7 investigation obviously requires that any conflicted parties should not be part and parcel of that organization. So at this stage, they are not rendering any services whatsoever with Ithala institution.
Are they suing Ithala Bank?
No, not at this stage.
Well, Mr. Vilakazi, obviously we'll talk a lot more, but I think interesting to note that there needs to be trust in these institutions that would take over these functions. And good
Correct.
to speak to you about where Ithala Bank is at the moment. And no doubt we'll speak a little bit more now that some of the technicalities have been sorted out by Treasury to pave the way for the establishment of a state bank. And that was Ithala Bank CEO, Dr. Thulani Vilakazi, advocating for the official recognition and conversion of the Ithala Bank as a state bank by government.